The frost that morning clung to every surface in Seattle, not with snow, but with that silvery sting that bit at your cheeks and curled beneath your collar. People bustled in and out of the private rehabilitation clinic on Pine Street, their breath rising like ghostly clouds, their faces half hidden beneath scarves and hurried purpose. Charles Whitmore did not hurry. The tall, sharply dressed man emerged through the clinic's revolving door with the precision of someone who was always in control, or at least needed to appear so. His tailored wool coat hung heavy over a three-piece suit, and even his gloved hands moved with economy. Beside him, in a custom wheelchair, sat his daughter, Emily, 11 years old and silent. She had not spoken much in the past 3 months. The accident had taken more than just movement from her legs. It had hollowed out the girl who once did cartwheels on the Whitmore lawn and climbed trees like she'd been born to live in them. Now her face was pale, not from the cold, but from the effort of pretending she wasn't broken. Charles adjusted the scarf around her neck and glanced at the waiting car across the curb. As they began to move forward, he noticed someone, just a flicker of movement, on the concrete steps to the clinic. A boy, probably 15, a ratty red hoodie pulled low over his face. His jeans were shredded at the knees, and his backpack looked like it had been sewn together by time itself. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't even holding a sign. He was drawing. A worn notebook rested on his lap, and his fingers, bare, despite the chill, moved with surprising stillness across the page. He looked up, not at Charles, but at Emily, and in that second his eyes softened. Not pity, not curiosity, something stranger, like recognition. Charles was already brushing past when the boy spoke, barely louder than a whisper. "She will walk again, sir." The words slid through the air like a match against stone, soft, uninvited, but sparking something. Charles froze. His first instinct was anger, then confusion, then deeper anger. He turned sharply toward the boy. "What did you say?" The boy didn't flinch. He stood, small and bony, holding the sketchbook under his arm like a shield. "She will walk again," he repeated. Calm, certain. Charles's jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me. You don't know her. You don't know anything about us." "I don't have to," the boy replied, voice even. "I can still help." Charles scoffed. "The audacity! You're a kid sitting on cold concrete with nothing but duct tape holding your bag together. You think you can say something like that and— What? Inspire us? Shame us?" The boy's gaze didn't falter. "It's not a trick. It's a truth." Charles almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. Something about the way the boy stood there, like he'd been waiting for them, like he'd already seen this scene play out. "I'm not giving you money," Charles said stiffly. "I didn't ask for it." Charles stared at him for a moment longer before turning away. "Come on, Emily," he said briskly, and wheeled her toward the car. But that night, long after Emily had fallen asleep and the house was still, Charles sat at the end of his long mahogany desk, replaying the boy's voice in his mind. "She will walk again." It had been months since he'd heard anything close to certainty. Doctors spoke in percentages, therapists in probabilities. The boy's words, so blunt, so irrational, should have been easy to dismiss. And yet, the next morning, as Charles prepared Emily's tea, He caught something in her eyes, a flicker, a trace of wonder where there had only been resignation. That made up his mind, not because he believed it, but because he couldn't afford not to check. When he returned to the clinic the following afternoon, the boy was there again, as if he'd never left. "I figured you might come back," the boy said simply. Charles studied him. "You're not going to stop, are you?" "No, sir." "What do you want from us?" "Just 1 hour," the boy said. "My grandma taught me things. She helped soldiers walk again. I just need 1 hour to show you." Charles hesitated. He hated wasting time. But there was something so devoid of performance in the boy's tone, so plain. It was almost unsettling. "Fine," he muttered. 1 hour. Where?" "Lincoln Park. Saturday. Noon." Charles nodded once. "If you waste my time, don't expect me to be polite about it." "I won't waste it," the boy replied, already sitting back down, returning to his sketch. That Saturday, Lincoln Park was quiet, save for a few joggers and the distant bark of a retriever. Emily looked around, unsure. "Why are we here, Daddy?" "I just want to see something," Charles replied. They found the boy, Jamal, he'd said his name was, waiting near a patch of dry grass with a yoga mat, a plastic bag, and a battered tennis ball. He stood up as they approached, rubbing his hands together. "Hello again," he said. Emily gave a polite, wary nod. Charles didn't return the greeting. "This is what you brought?" he asked skeptically, eyeing the homemade setup. Jamal smiled. "It's all I need." He turned to Emily and knelt beside her. "Hi, Emily." "Is it okay if I work with your legs a little?" "Nothing will hurt. You can stop me any time." She looked at her father. Charles nodded curtly. And so Jamal began. He started by placing a warmed rice pack gently on her thighs. "Just to loosen the muscles," he explained. Then he massaged her calves with cocoa butter, slow and steady, explaining every move in a way that made it seem less like treatment and more like storytelling. His voice never changed, always calm, always kind. Emily tensed at first, but after a few minutes she leaned back into the wheelchair, eyes half closed. "Do you feel anything?" Jamal asked softly. "A little tingling," she said. Charles straightened. "What do you mean?" Emily shrugged, then smiled faintly. "It's like butterflies, not pain, just awake." Jamal looked up. "It's not a miracle. It's her body remembering it's still hers." Charles didn't respond. He just watched. They stayed for almost an hour. By the end, Emily's cheeks were pink from the cold, but she was laughing. Not forced, not polite. Real. Charles knelt beside Jamal before they left. "Where do you live, son?" Jamal hesitated. "Nowhere permanent." "Why?" "My grandma passed last year." Charles was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Would you consider staying at our home?" Jamal blinked. "Why?" "Because my daughter smiled today." By the time Saturday came again, something had shifted in the Whitmore household. The staff whispered a little softer. Emily's nurses seemed more attentive, as though they sensed the change before they understood it. And Charles, once a man whose days were carved into 15-minute increments, had cleared his entire morning. They arrived at Lincoln Park at 11:50. Jamal was already there. He wasn't drawing this time. Instead, he was arranging a faded bath towel across the grass, patting it flat with a kind of quiet reverence. Next to it sat a second-hand duffel bag filled with unlikely tools. A tennis ball, a container of cocoa butter, a rolled-up stretch band, and what looked like a sock stuffed with uncooked rice and tied off with string. He looked up and smiled as they approached. "Hi, Emily." She smiled back, small, shy, but it was there. Charles stood a step behind, his eyes scanning the park. Then the boy's face, then the contents of the bag, like he was still searching for the catch. "Didn't expect us to come back, did you?" he said. Jamal shrugged. "I hoped." Emily turned toward him. "What are we doing today?" "We're just going to talk," Jamal said, sitting cross-legged beside the mat. "And I'll show you a few things. No pressure. You're in control, always." He unpacked the rice sock and handed it to Charles. "Can you warm this up in your hands for a minute? Just keep rolling it back and forth." Charles frowned, but obeyed. Jamal turned to Emily. "Okay. Can I move your legs a bit like last time? No pain, I promise." "Okay," she said quietly. Jamal worked in silence for a while, slow rotations of the ankles, rhythmic flexing of the knees. He narrated each motion with calm clarity, not to explain, but to include her. "Your leg doesn't feel heavy. It feels like it's listening," he said. "Sometimes your body gets quiet when it's scared. We're just reminding it that it's safe now." Charles sat on the bench behind them, holding the warm sock, watching every move. "How do you know all this?" he finally asked. "My grandma used to say, 'Every muscle has a memory, but sometimes it forgets the story.' She taught me how to help it remember." Emily giggled softly. "That sounds like something a wizard would say." Jamal smiled. She kind of was. He laid the rice sock gently across Emily's knees and adjusted it until it sat just right. "You feel that warmth?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, it's nice. That's your body relaxing. That's when the magic happens." Charles folded his arms. "Magic?" Jamal looked up. "Not the kind with wands, the kind with patience." For the next half hour he guided her through light stretches, foot taps, and breath work. Nothing dramatic, nothing miraculous, but something was happening. Emily was present in a way she hadn't been in months. She asked questions. She told him about her favorite books. She laughed. At one point, she reached down and tapped her own knee. "Can you feel this?" she asked it, like it might answer back. Jamal chuckled. "You'd be surprised how often it does." After the session, Emily was glowing, not from exertion, but from the attention, from being talked to, not about. Charles helped her back into the wheelchair and hesitated before speaking. "Do you do this often? With others?" Jamal shook his head. "Not anymore." "What about school?" Jamal glanced down. "Not since last year." Charles waited. Jamal didn't elaborate. Instead, he looked at Emily. "You were amazing today." She beamed. "Can we do it again?" Jamal nodded. "Every weekend if you want." That night, back at the house, Charles stood in the hallway outside Emily's room. Through the cracked door, he watched as she held a flashlight under her blanket and wiggled her toes, just trying, just checking. Something inside him broke, or maybe melted. He knocked lightly and stepped in. "Hey, Em." "Yeah?" "What do you think if Jamal came over during the week, too? For therapy?" She sat up straighter. "You mean, like here? At home?" He nodded. Only if you're okay with it." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes." Charles stood still for a long moment. "Okay." The next morning, Charles drove across town and found Jamal sitting in the shadow of the same clinic they'd first seen him. He had a paper cup of water and his ever-present notebook. When Charles pulled up to the curb and rolled down the window, Jamal didn't look surprised. He stood, walked to the car, and waited. "I want to offer you something," Charles said, fingers tight on the steering wheel. "Room, meals, some stability, nothing permanent, just while you're helping Emily." Jamal didn't answer immediately. He looked down the street, then back at the man who had once spoken to him like he was a stain on the pavement. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay?" Jamal nodded. "I'd like that." That evening, Jamal stood awkwardly at the Whitmore front door, holding his tattered backpack and a rolled blanket. The butler opened the door with a raised brow. Charles waved him off. "He's with us." Inside, Emily ran down the hall, almost crashing into him with her wheelchair. "You're here," she said brightly. Jamal smiled. "Told you I would be." Charles showed him the guest room, a tidy space with a narrow bed, clean linens, a desk, and a view of the bay. "It's not much," Charles said. Jamal stared. "It's everything." The days began to stack like stones, routine but sacred. Mornings started with soft knock-knocks at Emily's door, followed by gentle exercises and guided stretches. Afternoons were full of music, conversation, stories. Emily was no longer a ghost in her own home. On the 12th day, something happened. They were in the garden, working through another session, when Emily suddenly gasped. "Wait," she said, staring down. "Wait, my toes." Charles leaned forward. "What about them?" "They're moving just a little. I didn't tell them to. They just did." Jamal's face lit up. "That's the brain catching up." Charles dropped to his knees beside her, eyes wide. He saw it too, the smallest, slightest twitch. But it was real. It was there. By the third week, Charles no longer left for the office in the mornings. He lingered. He cooked breakfast. He asked Jamal questions, real ones, about his grandmother, about his life. One evening, while Emily watched cartoons in the next room, Charles sat across from Jamal in the kitchen. "You said your grandma helped veterans?" Jamal nodded. "She ran sessions at a community center, no big machines, just mats, touch, patience. She used to say, 'The body's not broken, it's just paused.'" Charles looked down at his coffee. "Why did you choose to help my daughter?" he asked. Jamal shrugged, "Because she looked like she'd stopped believing in herself." He took a sip of water. "And I know what that feels like." That night, Charles stood alone in the backyard, looking up at the stars. For the first time in years, he didn't feel helpless. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was watching a beginning. The sun broke through soft Seattle clouds that Sunday, like a promise. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of light that makes you believe something good might happen. Jamal had already set up the mat. The towel was laid flat. The rice pack, warm and wrapped in cloth, rested nearby. The tennis ball, the stretch band, the cocoa butter, all arranged like sacred tools. But today there was something different, a second mat. Charles noticed it first. "What's that for?" he asked. Jamal glanced at him, a flicker of mischief in his eyes. "For you." Charles blinked. "For me?" "You've been watching," Jamal said. "Today you join us." Emily giggled. "Come on, Dad." Charles grunted but lowered himself onto the grass. His slacks would crease. His shoes weren't right for this. But none of it mattered. He took the stretch band Jamal handed him and followed instructions, awkward but willing. Emily did the exercises beside him. Toe flexes, hip rolls, small pulses of movement that had once felt impossible. And then something happened. She laughed, not politely, not because someone told a joke, because she felt it, that impossible mix of effort and hope and triumph. Her right foot curled in the grass, not because someone moved it for her, but because she had done it. Jamal noticed it first. "You feel that?" Emily nodded, breathless. "I'm doing it." Charles froze. Her foot. He had watched it flex, not a twitch, not a fluke. Controlled, intentional. He looked at Jamal, who only nodded, like he'd seen it coming all along. And from that moment on, they weren't doing sessions anymore. They were rebuilding a life. Jamal stayed in the guest room that week, but Charles noticed how little he actually used it. He was always in the kitchen early, prepping the rice pack, warming the cocoa butter in a mug of hot water. He moved like he had purpose again, like the boy who used to sketch alone in the cold had found something worth showing up for. Emily's progress accelerated. First, it was toe movement, then ankle rotations, then one bright morning, a soft knee bend. "Did you see that?" Emily gasped. Jamal smiled. "I saw it, and I'm not even surprised." The physical therapist from the clinic came by on Friday. She'd heard rumors, whispers in the hallways, chatter among nurses, that something was happening at the Whitmore estate. She ran her tests. Emily passed them all, and then did more. "She shouldn't be able to do this yet," the therapist said, stunned. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Charles only nodded, but inside, something cracked wide open. He no longer needed a second opinion. He had proof in every movement his daughter made. On the 6th week, Emily had a bad day. She tried to lift her leg and couldn't. She slapped the arm of her wheelchair and shouted, "It's not working anymore." Charles started forward, but Jamal raised a hand and knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said. "This happens. Progress isn't straight." "I don't want to go back," she cried. "You're not," he said gently. "You're just standing still today. That's allowed." "But it hurts," she whispered. Jamal nodded. "Pain's not the end. It's just a loud dot on the map." She stared at him. "What if I can't do it again?" He placed his hand lightly over hers. "Then we try together. That's what this is." Charles watched them from the kitchen window, his hand trembling on a coffee mug. He didn't interrupt. He didn't have to. Week 7 changed everything. They were in the living room. It was raining outside, the sound of drops soft against the windows. Jamal sat cross-legged in front of Emily, stretch band looped around her knees. Charles stood behind her, hands gently under her arms. Jamal's voice was soft. "Ready?" Emily nodded, her lips pressed tight in focus. "On 3, Jamal said. 1, 2, 3. And her knees lifted. Both. Not inches, centimeters, but they moved and stayed. Charles's knees buckled, and he dropped beside her, his hands clutching the floor as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But Emily turned toward Jamal and whispered, "I did it." And Jamal, his eyes glistening, only said, "Yeah, you did." By the 8th week, word had spread. A nurse from the clinic had seen Emily in the park and told her sister. A family from the suburbs showed up next Sunday, asking if their son, a boy recovering from a spinal infection, could join the session. Jamal didn't hesitate. He unfolded a towel for them. He knelt, asked the same questions, used the same hands, the same voice. "Do you feel that?" "You're doing great." No pressure, just presence. Charles watched from the side, not as a client, not as a skeptic, but as a witness. Jamal had something the world couldn't train, something that didn't come from degrees or certifications. He had patience that spoke louder than medicine. He had presence that made people believe. Week 9 was different. Jamal felt it before the car even pulled up. The air was charged, not electric, but sacred, like the moment before a first note of music, or the second before a curtain rises. The park was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. Jamal looked up from his towel, and Charles nodded once. "Today's the day," he said. Emily wheeled into position, not smiling, focused, strong. Jamal knelt in front of her. "Same thing. I guide. You lead." She nodded. Charles took his place behind her. "On 3, Jamal said. 1. Emily gripped the handles. 2. She closed her eyes. 3. And she rose. Not in a sudden burst, not dramatically, but fully. Her knees locked, her arms steadied, her face went pale with effort, but she stood, on her own 2 legs. The park held its breath. No one moved. And then she took a step, then another, and on the 3rd she stumbled right into her father's arms. He caught her, shaking. "I saw it," he whispered, voice cracking. "You did it! You did it!" Emily looked up at Jamal. "You said I would walk." Jamal smiled, tears barely held back. "No, I said you'd believe it. You walked." Charles dropped to his knees in the grass. He didn't care who saw, didn't care about the soil staining his pants or the onlookers murmuring behind their phones. He looked up at the boy who had changed his world. "Thank you," he said, voice raw. Jamal just shook his head. "I didn't do this alone." She chose to believe. That night, Emily curled up on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders and a smile that wouldn't leave. Jamal sat at the kitchen table, drawing quietly in his notebook. Charles walked in, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. He placed one next to the boy, then sat. "You changed everything," Charles said. Jamal didn't look up. "I just reminded her what she already had." Charles stared at him for a long moment. "You have a gift. You know that, right?" "I just show up," Jamal said, "like my grandma did." Charles smiled. "Well, you showed up for my daughter, for me." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside, a letter of recommendation. Full scholarship offer. Enrollment details at a medical preparatory school. Jamal stared at it. "I can't." "You can," Charles said. "Because if there's one thing I know now, it's that some people aren't trained to heal. They're born for it." Jamal's hands trembled as he took the letter. Emily's voice called from the living room. "Jamal, come see this." He stood, but not before looking back at Charles. "I'll keep showing up," he said. Charles nodded, eyes misted. "We will too." And so the boy who had nothing but a sketchbook and a rice sock became something more than a healer. He became a reason people believed again. And Emily, the girl who once stared out windows, paralyzed by fear, stood taller every day. They walked into the future together, not perfectly, but powerfully, and never alone.